And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. We are going to talk some Bud Dupree today, a potential return to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see if that's in the realm of possibility or not. We're going to hit on the NFL Combine results with maybe the Steelers' biggest notes from that, and even give our early draft predictions. But first, let's take a look at some of the trending topics around the NFL this week. We had some big news, Shayne, in regards to quarterback play. So let's kick it off with Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. Just received a massive contract extension, 4 years, paying him $40 million per season. You and I just looked at the details of this contract just now, just before the show started. And it's not as bad as you would think, but it is Daniel Jones, and we are talking about maybe a mid-tier NFL quarterback here. What are your thoughts on this? Like, are you okay with this contract for the Giants? Would you have rather them said, no, I'm not doing it. I'm going to refuse. I'm not going to go that direction. I'm just going to invest back into the quarterback position again. I mean, did you think they made the right choice here?
I think it's very difficult for a team like the Giants because they put themselves in a position by winning so much in Dable's first year and getting to the playoffs where they couldn't really justify the move up to get any quarterback worth trading Daniel Jones out for. And they also were in a position where the free agent market really isn't there outside of like if they would have let him go and try to get a Derek Carr or something like that. Like there just wasn't a lot of options to upgrade easily. So I think they probably took the approach of, okay, well, we'll just sign him to a deal that he's comfortable with, that we're comfortable with, that we can get out of in a couple of years. And that's kind of the key thing is when you look at the contract structure, most of the first 2 years are guaranteed. You're going to have a lot of guarantee money paid out in the first 3 years, especially, but you can get out of that deal in 2 years if you really want to, without really having to worry about the penalties and things like that. So this is truly like a 2-year, like $82 million deal, which still for Daniel Jones is a little bit money, but or a little too much money, but if Dable is comfortable with it and he was able to win with him with a roster that's really wasn't that good, like he had no receivers, no real weapons outside of Barkley, like I think the potential for him to be better than last year is still there, which would maybe make him closer to being worth that much money. And with the quarterback contracts right now, $40 million is not exactly what it was 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm lukewarm on it, but I understand like the process that they got to make that decision.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit easier to stomach when we do look at it in detail because the details do matter. And so knowing that you can get out of that contract, you will still eat some dead money. I think $18 million worth of dead money, but that's a small chunk of change compared to the savings that you would have at that time and your ability, at least flexibility to go back and try to redo the process over again. Now you could do a lot worse than Daniel Jones as your quarterback. We've seen that. Yes. Yeah. For sure. And so I don't want to harp on Jones too much. I think he's a solid football player, but I think he's at best, he's probably just an average NFL starter. And so in these days, it seems like, my goodness, $40 million is what gets you mediocrity, if you will. I mean, maybe just above that, but we're talking about a guy who, yes, the Giants went 9-6-1 last year. But I think that Brian Dable had a huge hand in that. And if we look at the previous season, this is a 4-win football team. And Daniel Jones was a part of that team. And it makes me wonder why they weren't better back then if your quarterback can elevate the play of the team around you. So just this past season, Daniel Jones had 3,200 yards and 15 passing touchdowns. Now, he did a lot of his damage on the ground as well. I think that's part of their game plan there. But the fact that you can just get away with just like bottom of the barrel, like volume numbers and stuff and still get that kind of money just shows you how valuable the quarterback position is in the NFL and how much teams are willing to pay to keep that guy around. And so good luck to them. Like I hope the Giants do well. They're a team that I want to see kind of make a turnaround here in that NFC East. But it'll be interesting to see if that contract pays off for them or not. If you have a question for us and you are watching the show live, please drop it in the chat. We'd love to be able to get to it and answer any questions you might have. Let's talk about Lamar Jackson now. Shift gears a little bit. This one pertains much more so to the Pittsburgh Steelers and how things go from here. This is the AFC North. Lamar was a former MVP quarterback. I know there are varied opinions about his play and his ability as a passer, all that kind of stuff. I think Lamar's a good player. I said it back when they drafted him. I think the Steelers should have drafted him. They should have.
I
I would
yeah.
have been. I'm always more forward thinking. I know that we had at the time, I think, a 37-year-old Ben,
Yeah.
who we can kind of see some signs of, and I was really high on Lamar. I think he was my 10th overall player in the 2018 draft. Fell to pick 30. Steelers picked at 28. They took Terrell Edmonds, a player I had a 3rd-round grade on. Edmonds has done fine with the Steelers. But anytime you get a chance to get a quarterback like that, I'm not going to make this about the Steelers. This is about Lamar. Right. But what happens with Lamar, Shayne, going forward, it affects the Steelers. This is it's right to think of thing, and it's a team that the Steelers are always kind of neck and neck with. And even though the Steelers have played Lamar as well as anybody in the NFL, this is a team that always seems to pump out like 9 or 10 wins. And it's worth noting that with Tom Brady retired, I believe that Lamar Jackson has the best win percentage when he starts among all NFL active quarterbacks. That is something that is noteworthy, and it deserves to be thrown out there. We're still talking about a young quarterback. So what's happening with Lamar? We know he just got the franchise tag, but stipulation to that, a team can come and snatch him for the price of 2 first-round picks, make an offer. The Ravens would have a chance to match that offer. And if they don't, then he belongs to just a different franchise after that. It's funny because the most recent reports say that 5 teams are already out on him. Yeah. Before it seems like they even have done their homework on Lamar, they're out. And I don't know if it's just for reasons of whether or not they think he fits or whatnot. But how do you feel about this? And what would you do, Shayne, if you were a quarterback needy team out there that maybe say, oh, we're not in a position to grab a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young in the draft? Are you willing to make that move for Lamar?
I think it's really interesting from the Ravens' perspective. I want to start there because the decision to put the non-exclusive tag on him was very much intentional. Obviously, they think that Lamar, what he's asking for, which again we have to assume it's probably either in the ballpark of or equal to what Watson got from the Browns, just because that's kind of the new precedent for quarterback contracts, and considering his, we'll just say questionable background. We'll leave it at that. For him getting that contract and Lamar asking for it is totally fair. He's been an MVP. He's really the reason this team has been as good as it's been since he's been there. But from the Ravens' perspective, I think them and the rest of the ownership do not want to make this a precedent, right? They do not want to make that fully guaranteed or mostly guaranteed contract a precedent for these players, because the money is just going to get a little too much, I think, for even teams that maybe can afford to do it financially, but the cap is just going to be a problem because you can't restructure, you can't move money around when you're talking about guaranteed deals. It is what it is, right? You have to work with that number. I think that's what's hurting him a little bit because the Ravens don't want to commit to that, and other teams might not want to commit to that. And I think the Ravens are banking on the fact that another team is not going to be willing to pay him more than they're willing to pay him, right? So they just want someone else to set the market for him. They want to let Lamar find out the hard way that just no one's going to give him the deal he wants. And they're hoping that once that happens, they can match the deal and they can come together and it'll be okay. But I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think there's teams that even if they say they're out, once this gets rolling and once free agency gets rolling, once teams figure out what they want to do with some of their money, there's going to be at least, I think, 1 or 2 teams willing to try to make a deal that even the Ravens just maybe say, we can't do it. We're just not able to do it. We don't want to do it. You can have them. Give me your 2 first-round picks. It's possible still. But I think that them doing this sends a message that the ownership across the NFL, like I said, does not want to set that precedent for these contracts.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable to me that Deshaun Watson was able to get that fully guaranteed contract like
exactly.
He was, considering all the off-the-field issues that were involved at the time. And so I don't think that the rest of the NFL is ready to get on board with that quite yet, even for comparable or even possibly better talent. And so we're seeing that. We're seeing a little pushback there. And I think that we're seeing that by the Ravens. And I can kind of understand where they're coming from. I think Lamar's a good player. I think that when you have a franchise quarterback and a guy like that, you should do what you can to keep him around. But I understand that some things have to change. And I like the Steelers had to create a new precedent for TJ Watt. I mean, Watt was an exception to the mold. And so when it comes to guaranteed money and what you should give Lamar, I mean, a lot of different schools of thought there, and a lot is up for debate. Now, from Lamar's perspective, I can totally understand saying, yeah, I'm not okay with that. With what Russell Wilson just got, with what these guys are getting in terms of guaranteed money in their contracts, you want that, especially for a guy that runs the ball a lot. If you have an ACL tear, you blow out your Achilles, whatever else, he needs to have that insurance for the sake of his career path. And it doesn't look like he's getting that from Baltimore. And I think that Lamar wants out. I still don't know, Shane. I don't know if that's going to happen this offseason or next year. But it's coming. And I can't see him staying at this point anymore. I think that they're growing even further apart with each passing day, it seems like. Yeah. And so I'm just so interested now to see, okay, we're in a scenario now that we don't see very often in the NFL. Is somebody going to come in with that non-exclusive tag and come in and poach Lamar at the price of 2 first-round picks, knowing that they're still going to have to pay him a lot of guaranteed money? Is that going to happen? I don't know. And so that's going to be an interesting situation to monitor. Like I said, it does affect the Pittsburgh Steelers, because if the Ravens don't have a quarterback going into next year, I mean, we just moved up the totem, I think, a little bit if we weren't there already. I mean, some people may have already viewed Steelers as that second team. I think we're still behind the Bengals. I think Joe Burrow is the team.
It's hard to argue with that at this point.
It is, and until we start having a little bit more success against. I know there was the fluky game beginning there, then he kind of beat us good later in the season. But I mean, every bit matters in a race as tight as the AFC North. And I would expect, I don't want to give the Browns too much credit because I think we overhype them every year, but I would expect Deshaun Watson to take a step forward. Now that he's had a full offseason, at least be better than he was. So it's going to be a tight division, I think, no matter how you slice it. And if Lamar is not part of the picture, well, my goodness, I think I think it's safe to say that Baltimore just took a step back, and at least for the near future.
No offense to Tyler Huntley, but I'm not buying him leading them to
He's a Pro Bowl quarterback. What are you talking about?
Yeah, he's a Pro Bowl quarterback. Yeah, you can't discredit him. But nah, it's tough for the Ravens, because I think that they don't want to. They're trying to play this game of like, is it better to go all in and just be prepared to deal with the consequences if it doesn't work out, or are they more prepared to kind of go in a different direction and see if they can retool this team into something different? And you already can see with the hiring of the offensive coordinator from Georgia, Todd Monken, like they're trying to go in a different direction schematically, at least compared to what they've done. But I think that isn't an indicator of whether they want Lamar. I think it just means that they understand that things have to be a little bit different, which is good, regardless of who's the quarterback there. But it's tough. I mean, paying all that money, it's a risk, but it's also a risk to not have an MVP quarterback that you've had. So
yeah. So Shane, let me just ask you one more question about Lamar. Sure. And we'll move on to the next topic. If you were a Baltimore Ravens fan, I hate even saying that, but if you were a Baltimore Ravens fan, what would you want them to do in this situation?
I'd want them to figure out a way to make him be the quarterback for the next 5 years. Because you just, again, as a fan perspective too, like I understand, even as a fan with the Steelers, there's certain things that I would love them to do, but even I understand it's probably not the best thing to do. If you're the Ravens, you have a veteran coach. You don't know how long Harbaugh's going to be around for, whether it's because he just wants to quit or if things don't go well for the next few years. You have a veteran roster. I think that this is a point where, unless you're willing to blow it up, you have to commit to Lamar, because there's so many other things you'd have to do to really retool or rebuild, that starting that process now, you just signed Patrick Queen to a big contract at linebacker. You don't want that on your books for a rebuilding team, even though he's very good. I think it was semi worth it. But again, like there's too many things in place already that make me think they're trying to continue to win now, where I don't know if you can do that with a rookie or, like I said, Tyler Huntley. I don't know if that's possible with those guys. So.
Yeah, and I think that the roster is talented enough around him.
Yes.
And so I agree with you. I think that is what they should be trying to do. I just don't think that it gets done. I mean, if at the very, very most, I think maybe Lamar plays this year, but you even were telling me just before, Shane, that you don't think he'll play on the tag,
not
right?
$32.5 million. I know it's still guaranteed contract and everything, but like I think he'll tell them basically, you can call me in week 10 and let me know if you're going to sign me long term, and if you're not, then we'll see each other next year. Like I really think he would be willing to do that. He's still a young player. If he loses a year, it's not like he is going to be in his 30s now all of a sudden. Like it's not that surprising if that happens. I really think it's possible. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, and I would think he would have a lot more leverage than a player like Le'Veon Bell when he did it. So
the Ravens are 2-6 going into week 9 or something.
Then that's only going to make the number go up, and it is going up with each year that passes too. We see that the cap rise and the quarterback, those salary numbers rise as well. One more thing here of a general NFL topic, Shane, and then we're going to get to some Bud Dupree stuff. Both Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry are said to be potentially open and maybe on the trade block at this point in time. these are running backs, and these are good. I mean, we're talking about good running backs still. I know that Henry's not the same player as he was. Chubb is still phenomenal. Why are they coming on the block? Are NFL teams now finally saying, yeah, I don't think it's worth paying running backs this much money?
I think with Chubb, I don't get it because,
Yeah.
again, he's still clearly in his prime as a player. And even if they are, there's been reports about them moving more to the passing game, obviously, and try to make that investment in Watson worth it. Chubb is still so phenomenal as a runner, and he doesn't need 20 carries to get you 70, 80 yards and a couple touchdowns. Like, he doesn't have to be a workhorse, technically workhorse back for him to be worth the money that he's getting paid, right? So Chubb, I don't really get it because it's not like they really, like, their cap situation isn't so bad, even with the Watson deal, that they need to cut him or trade him. The Henry one does make a little bit of sense to me because I think the Titans understand at this point that their window is kind of past them a little bit at this point. Like, I don't think Tannehill is gonna play like he did a couple years ago at this point. The offensive line is a mess. They're probably gonna have to address that in drafts or free agency just to get it to a competent level. Losing Taylor Lewan by cutting him. Like, there's so many things happening with the Titans that I think they're still going to try to be competitive, but I don't think that they're expecting to be that, AFC contender or anything like that. And Henry, as good as he is for them, he does kind of limit them offensively in the sense that, like, they know if they have him on the team and pay him what he's getting paid, they have to run the offense through him as a runner. And that's worked for years, but it's as he gets older and if the injuries continue to pile up, he probably is better off going to a team that would use him more, not sparingly, but not give him, that 320 carries a year like he's been getting for the past few years. So,
yeah, it makes me wonder, Shane, like, are these teams, the Browns and the Titans have been some of the most run heavy teams that we've seen in the past like decade of football. Are they just now coming to the realization, like, we can't get over the hump like this? Like, as good as our running games have been, and they've been phenomenal for both of those teams, I feel like it's never quite enough. Like, what's Tennessee going to do right now? You got Ryan Tannehill, you got Treylon Burks. You're going to rely on the rest of your skill players. You're going to start airing the ball out 40 times a game. I don't know. I mean, now what I will say is Chubb and Henry have worked out as well as you could possibly ask for.
Yes, exactly.
They only had to spend second round picks. Yeah, it's these weren't first round running backs. They only had to spend second round picks on these guys. They were every bit as good and better that you could expect a second round pick to be. But now, even on these second deals that they have, it looks like these teams are already looking at them and say, hey, I just don't know if we can keep you around at your price tag, especially when it is such a passing league, when we're trying to pass the ball 70% of the time. I don't know. It's interesting that suddenly two of the best backs in the league are being, or at least were over the last 5 years, and Chubb still is, they're being shopped now. And so you don't see that with other premier positions unless, like, you are in such a financial bind that you don't know what to do with yourself. So just interesting to note there. I don't want to bring up a bad topic for anybody else again, but Steelers did just spend a first round pick on a running back in 2021. I'm hoping they don't find themselves in this situation. Maybe if they do, it's a good thing. It means that Najee has turned out, but they've already spent that first round pick. I think, Shane, personally, my philosophy, giving second deals to running backs is always risky business, because unless you have a Christian McCaffrey or a Nick Chubb, you're spending a lot of money at a non-premium position where so many factors depend on their success. And so I think we're seeing the NFL backpedal a little bit when it comes to the running back position, and maybe it won't be valued quite as much in the future. And you look at the guys that are in the free agent market this year, there are a plethora of talented running backs that are set to hit the market, and who knows what they're going to go for. It's going to be a really interesting offseason to see how that kind of stuff unfolds. All right, Shane, let's talk about Bud Dupree here for a little bit. Dupree expected to be released by the Tennessee Titans. And so far as I know, it hasn't been made official yet, but it's coming soon.
Yeah, it seems pretty sure it's going to happen.
Yeah. Just a colossal mistake, I think, on their part. And I know that people were really high on Dupree at the time. I mean, he had the 11.5 sack season for the Steelers. I think he had one more after that. It was like 9 sacks. I thought at the time, and I said so, I think that Dupree probably should have got paid in the 9 to 10 million range. I saw him as a clear number 2 edge. I did not see an elite edge player. The Titans went and paid him a 5-year, $82.5 million contract, 16 and change per year. They're out of that after 2 years at a premium position, because Dupree just was not very good for them. He was very not productive, was banged up a lot. now we're looking at this guy. It's like, all right, Dupree just turned 30 years old. I don't know what type of market he has after 2 down seasons, graded out 90th or worst among edge players each of the past 2 years, according to Pro Football Focus. Never had more than 3 sacks. I think maybe he had 4 sacks in 2021. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but not very productive at all. Certainly not for what you're paying. And so is this a guy, Shane, that the Steelers should look to bring back? Knowing their situation right now, you got TJ Watt, you got Alex Highsmith. Their depth situation was horrible last year. Yeah. Would Dupree be okay to going back to maybe a reserve role, coming in, spelling Watt and Highsmith of snaps? Would he take an edge 3 job? Or do you think that it's like, all right, I'm going to look for one more big contract out there. Somebody else is going to like my former first round status, like my athleticism, and I'm going to try going somewhere where I could potentially start.
I think, like you said, and it is really about what is Dupree looking for. Because if he wants a prove-it deal where he gets a chance to play, maybe not as a starter, like you said, the third edge guy for us, obviously, if he were to come back here. If he wants that, then I think it'd be a great fit because, again, we don't have the edge depth right now. That's why, like, the draft might be important for that position. For agency could come into play. Like, we met with a lot of edge guys. We'll talk about that later at the Combine. I think there's a reason for that because, we don't have the depth and we don't know about Highsmith at this point, whether or not that deal is going to eventually come through. So it would make a lot of sense for the Steelers to add him if the money is right. So again, if the money isn't right, then you have to wonder, okay, is he looking for like a big 1-year deal, but to prove it still? Is he looking for a multi-year contract for, maybe obviously less money than he made with the Titans or was going to make with the Titans, but still more than we can justify for a third edge. And I think it's more likely that he's going to look for like a still shorter term, but more upfront money deal with a team that really needs edge help. You could look at a team like the Falcons who don't really have much of anything. Like there's multiple teams that could use an edge, but you kind of hit it on the head though. They paid him like an edge 1 and he was really an edge 2, edge 3 type. Like that's the kind of player he is. He's super athletic. We know all that, but he's really more of like, he's a run and chase guy. He doesn't have a ton of pass rush moves. It's more so just relying on his speed and athleticism and his power, which again, that gets you pretty far whenever you're the number 2 guy and you're not the focus of things. But when he was the focus or when he was getting paid like one, he just didn't happen. And you have to worry about injuries too. Like, especially if he's going to be a depth guy, if he's banged up all the time, not having that depth, if you do have an injury at the starters, it's just going to make it even worse.
Yeah, I think there is certainly should be at least a level of intrigue here.
I'm sure there will be.
Because I mean, when he was playing across from TJ Watt, that's when his career really kicked off for the Steelers as that overhang defender. And I think if you're just asking, he's not a guy that has an array of pass rush moves, doesn't have a ton of length, can't disengage extremely well, but a guy that can just explode off the line of scrimmage and make and get some disruption that way.
Yeah.
I think that if the price is right, like you said, this is going to come down to Dupree. Do I want to sign a 1-year deal to try to redeem myself? Am I willing to sign a multi-year deal? And I don't know if that will matter necessarily so much, but we'll see how this market is.
Yeah.
If we had to put a number on it, Shane, what are you thinking for Dupree? Like, what would you be comfortable doing? Like, are we taking like $4 or $5 million range for a year, or what do you think?
I think like a 1 year, $5-ish million plus is probably what you'd be looking for if you're going to bring in the third edge, right? That's kind of the market for that third guy and for agency, I think is where you're looking at. If he wants, 7, 8, 9, I think you need to let another team go ahead and sign him to that contract to be like probably in that case a second edge for a team looking to boost their pass rush. I think what's going to hurt him though, and why it might be more likely that he'd be available for the money that would make sense, is this edge class is deep and good.
Yeah, it is.
Like, there's so many guys, and that's now you could look at that as a reason for the Steelers not to also do it. But I think other teams that don't have the familiarity with him might look at him and say, hey, I don't know about your health. I don't know about your ability to be a true like edge on, first, second, and third down. Like, I'm going to go ahead and take my chances with the draft. And that would allow the Steelers maybe to swoop in and bring him back. But I think it's definitely a crapshoot whether or not he'll be available for both the money and the length of contract that we're looking for. But I think they should at least check in on him and see, like, what are you thinking? Would you be interested in coming back? How much would it cost? Like, that's definitely something I expect to happen.
Yeah, and it's just way too valuable of a position to not have somebody better than
at least to talk
Malik
to.
Reed sitting there. You have to have a better third edge, and we saw what happened when the Steelers didn't. The difference was as big as any difference you can imagine at one position, going from Watt to what the Steelers had, which was next to nothing. I mean, it at times it seemed like they were playing with 10 players on the field.
It really
because
did,
they
yeah,
couldn't
unfortunately.
get any pressure. And so you have to have your bases covered when you hand out the biggest defensive contract in the NFL and you've got a defensive MVP. You got to make sure that you got an insurance policy for that guy. I do think that Dupree would offer that for the Steelers at the right price. And it would give them some insurance if Watt or Highsmith were to get injured this year. And I think that they have to cover their bases this time around. But we'll be monitoring that situation, obviously, because that's one I think that the connection makes a lot of sense. And he's not going to get anywhere near the contract that he got the first time around by the Tennessee Titans. So that'll be interesting. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all your support. All right, Shane, let's shift gears here. Last time we kicked this off, it was just before the start of the NFL Combine. Now we've got hours of Combine in the book. I sat there and watched virtually every minute of it. And I was intrigued by all of it because the Combine is something that interests me. I know that it's the Underwear Olympics. A lot of people don't read too much into that, but I do think there are some telling things about the numbers that we see there. And again, it comes down to thresholds, avoiding risks, and taking players that can maximize the potential of your team. And so lots of things to note from here. Let's first start, Shane, by talking about some of the risers and fallers based on Combine performances. And why don't we go ahead and kick things off with Jordan Addison. And I think clearly, I know that he was really smooth during the drills and everything, but he's got to be a faller. Got to be a faller after this. When you come in at 173 pounds, soaking wet, knowing that the Combine was coming up and you had a chance to add weight like a lot of other receivers and players do, like Bryce Young did, probably. I don't believe it. I'm not buying for a second that Bryce Young is 204 pounds. I don't care what you say.
If Bryce Young is 204 pounds, I'm 250, and guess what? I ain't close to it. I'm above that. So I think with Addison,
it's the most fraudulent. But Addison, I mean, it makes me wonder, like, if this guy's coming in the Combine at 173, was he playing at 165? Because this is a guy, even back in his time at Pitt, he was listed at 170. That's real thin for a receiver.
Yeah.
And it looks like he hasn't got much bigger from them. But it's not just the weight for Addison. He came in just a tick over 5'11", short arms, small hands. It's a small catch radius. And I went on record on Twitter and I said, if you are a guy with a short, compact frame and you're you're sub 175, you better walk on water with your athleticism and your explosiveness, kind of like Calvin Austin did. And Austin's a guy, again, went compensatory 4th round, despite his elite production at Memphis and his amazing athletic tools. Now, I know obviously Addison's a better prospect than that, but if he doesn't offer elite athletic traits, he tested as a very average athlete. In respect to his size, that's not very impressive when you consider that he's 5'11", 173 pounds with short arms. How does that change things for you, Shane, when it comes to Addison? I know that he's been kind of a fan favorite for Steelers with the connection to Kenny Pickett throughout this process. Do you view him any differently? Where would you feel comfortable taking him?
So I don't really view him that much differently because I already viewed this receiver class in general as kind of, compared to the past few years, really the last 7, 8 years, it's a bit of a down year. There's a lot of wide receiver 2s in this class. There's a lot of wide receiver 3s. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of teams need those types of players right now. You could argue that we do as well. I think with him is his testing doesn't really change anything for me because this is kind of what I expected from him.
Yeah.
I don't see him on film as this, explosive. He's obviously not big. I wasn't expecting that. He's not as fast as people would assume a player like his stature is, or a player that wins the way he does. He's definitely a creative after the catch kind of player. He's not going to run away from everyone. He runs away from plenty of people. So 4.49 is not, bad speed. It's just not as much as you'd like to see from a guy 173 pounds. But when you watch him, you see the creativity is he's able to really break more tackles than you expect for a guy his size. All that stuff is what you see after the catch. It's not so much just run away from everybody. So that didn't surprise me. I still view him as an early second, mid-second round talent. And I think in a receiver class that's weak, that probably will push him into the first round consideration still. But the earliest I'd be willing to take him, especially from looking at it from the Steelers' perspective, pick 32, I would totally understand. I think that's fair value for where you're taking receiver in this class, considering they're kind of, like I said, in a down year. But I think there's other receivers I kind of like better for that pick. I mocked in the mock I did a week or so ago. I mocked Zay Flowers, who I really like. He didn't really run as fast as I thought he would, but he looks faster than that on film, so I'm not too worried about it. There's other guys that I think might be a better fit for what we're looking for anyway, but that's probably his range, is that mid to high second round pick range for us.
Yeah, and my grade didn't change on Addison. I had a second round grade on him before this time. But a lot of people, I don't know, I feel like we get kind of caught up with these type of players a little bit. I know there are a lot of people saying you'd be crazy not to take him at 17. I'm like, I really don't get that narrative at all. And I think that combine was just confirmation of what I already thought and already knew, that he's not an elite athlete. You can see that on film. He doesn't have elite speed, elite explosion, elite twitch. I think he's good at those things, but not great in terms of NFL standards. And I think that you are very much getting a guy who wins from his savvy route running, his good head fakes, that kind of stuff. I don't think that he's particularly strong after the catch. Like even compare him to like Deontay. And I know that Deontay has been wildly inconsistent. Obviously, you're hoping that you get a much better version of that type of player. Yeah. But I think Deontay is more quick twitched in terms of like in and out of break stuff.
I would say
than
so
what Addison is.
Yeah, than what Addison's shown. Yeah, so you're looking for a similar player to him in terms of style, but I don't know if he's as, like you said, explosive. But similar players.
And he's not very explosive, and that's just the way that he is. But again, I agree with you. I would take him in the second round. I was never on board with him at 17. Still am not. And it's just not a good wide receiver class. I'm sorry. I mean, if we look at him real quick, Shane, if we just compare Addison and we throw him in last year's class, where does he go? I mean, we're talking, we've got
sixth receiver,
Drake,
probably.
Drake London, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jamison Williams. And then the next range there, we've got Jahan Dotson. We've got Treylon Burks. And that's not even counting Christian Watson, who went in the second round, George Pickens, who went in the second round. Pickens was the 11th receiver taken last year.
It's like,
I mean, if you throw Pickens into this draft class, he's a first rounder. And so
easily,
you have to take things, you have to cross compare. And I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not cross comparing. And because then you have to understand that Addison is not a truly first round graded player, because if we look at him compared to last year's receivers, it's impossible to justify that, I think. So especially considering his production got cut in half when he went to USC, despite being with Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. I know he's a little bit banged up there, but I mean, it's just hard to justify with a guy that doesn't have any elite traits that way. I think he will be a solid wide receiver 2 in the NFL. I think that's a guy that you take on day 2, though, not in the first round. That's my opinion on him. Let's shift gears to another player. Let's talk about Joey Porter real quick. And what do you think about his combine? I mean, the wingspan is just remarkable. You don't get guys that get an 81-inch wingspan with 34-inch arms, and that helps a lot at the cornerback position.
It does.
If we were talking, we're looking at 2 homer players, if you will, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2 guys that have been very much in connection because of, for obvious reasons, Joey Porter being the son of Joey Porter Sr., and then Addison playing his best ball with Kenny Pickett. The difference is, Shane, I really like one in the first round, and the other one I don't like until the second round. And the guy I really like is Joey Porter. And again, to me, it means nothing. I don't care about his roots, his bloodlines, any of that. I care about the prospect. I don't want the Steelers to miss on the pick. And I think that Porter is legitimately a good player. And he's got some things to work on. He's a little bit stiff-hipped, but you just don't find cornerbacks like this. This is not like taking Artie Burns in the first round in 2016. So don't confuse it with that. Even if there are 2 corners gone by that point, this is a remarkable cornerback class. And so there's going to be CB3, CB4 available for Steelers, and those guys are going to be better than a lot of number 1 cornerbacks in a lot of years. So what do you make of the Joey Porter combine? And do you think he's going to be available for the Steelers at this point after what happened in Indianapolis?
I still think it's possible because, again, I still think teams are going to view Gonzalez out of Oregon and Witherspoon as the 2 best corners, and I think they should. I think that's totally fair. But Porter, like you say, just offers a unique build and skill set. Like you wonder a little bit about the ball production that's been talked about, and I understand that, especially for a guy with his length and size, you'd expect him to get more hands on balls. But I think that can be taught, and he can get better at that. But again, you just can't teach the profile, and he ran about as well as I hoped he would. I think he's got the athleticism we need to run with guys down the field. I'm not worried about that, especially he's got a little bit more leeway because, again, he can stick an arm in there that other guys just can't get to there. So he does have a little bit more room for that, room for error. But again, he's a very good prospect. I think 17 is definitely good value for him. I do think that a team like maybe Washington, picking right ahead of us, could end up being the team that
Yeah.
takes the third corner. I think that's totally possible. So you have to watch out for that. But even if that happens, there's some other corners like Deontay Banks out of Maryland had a day on his day. Like his
Oh, yeah.
tape, like I think people were wondering because they didn't get to see him flash his athleticism a ton at Maryland. The tape was unbelievable on him, and I've seen a lot of him because of that. I look back and watch some of him. Him testing the way he did, that's going to move him up boards. He could be even ahead of
Yep.
Porter in some teams' boards. Like, there's going to be somebody at 17, I think, at corner that is good value, and that means I think that's going to determine whether or not we go that direction, or if those guys are gone, whether we're going to be talking about another group of players on the both the edge and in the trenches as well. But
yeah, he was definitely an interesting player from the combine there. And then, like we said, just a guy that you do not find that type of length at the
no,
cornerback position,
that
hardly
profile
ever.
just
And
doesn't
so,
exist usually.
and the fact that he's already I think he probably is a true first round talent just because the total package is exceptional. What you're getting. My biggest concern with Porter would be only had one career interception in college, and that is a
Ball
concern.
production.
If you're yeah, I mean, if you end up being Ike Taylor, that's a great player still, but you
True.
want a guy that you want a guy that can take the ball away. And so,
ideally.
and I do wonder how he fits with Steelers. I do think that he's probably best for a team that does like a lot of bump and run coverage. Like I think that's where he's really going to excel, use his long arms and physicality. But I don't know. It'll be interesting. And I have to assume that Porter for sure is going to be on the radar. It's a position of need. Who knows what's going to happen with the Cam Sutton thing too. So
that's something to keep in mind too.
Let's throw another name out there. We'll do a couple more. I want to talk about Jack Campbell real quick, the Iowa linebacker. I see a lot of people talking about him in connection to the Steelers. And I think the reasons there are pretty obvious as well. Devin Bush was horrendous last year. I don't think that Miles Jack had a very good season, no matter what you want to talk yourself into. And again, the Steelers have a decision to make with him in terms of the money and what's going on. Robert Spillane is a free agent. It's just a weak off-ball linebacking corpse for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. Jack Campbell, I think, and especially after his testing, very much in the mold of the Leighton Vander Esch type, the guy that can turn and run in coverage, even though he's just a 4.65 guy. But when you get a guy that's 6'4.5", 249 pounds, with the blend of athletic traits, movement skills, the way that he has, a guy that you don't need to take off the field. He will be good enough in coverage, actually graded out very well in coverage. I would expect it to come down a little bit just because he's going to be going against really fast players in the NFL, but I thought he was exceptional at Iowa. Had 271 tackles over the past 2 seasons, 4 interceptions over that span. So he's got the production. He checks all the boxes. And we know how much the Steelers were interested in a player like Vander Esch back in the 2018 draft, the year before they took Devin Bush. There were reports that Steelers were willing to even move up a little bit for him before Dallas took him. I think that Campbell is in that mold of player, and I think that he did himself a lot of favors at the combine testing as a 99th percentile athlete in respect to his size, and he already has the film to go with it. So what are your thoughts on him?
He's a guy that I think if the Steelers wanted to draft somebody who can play, like you said, all 3 downs right now, he is one of those guys that fits that mold. I think there's a couple guys that you could say that about in this class, especially look at guys like Drew Sanders. He's newer to the position, so I understand maybe favoring Campbell a little bit, but the athletic potential of Sanders is crazy. But there's some guys that I think can come in and play all 3 downs. Like maybe not at a high level initially, especially in coverage, depending on who you're looking at, but Campbell's one of those players that if you can get him, especially at 49. Now, I don't know how early he's going to go at this point because linebackers are tough to evaluate with how much the first round bust rate has become a problem for teams. But if he's available, especially like pick 49, it's a big need and it's a fair value for a player that has his, like you said, his film and his all of his testing numbers at the combine show that he is a quality athlete, which you can see that on film, but you always like to get that confirmation. He would definitely be a big impact year one, I think, even though linebacker can be hard to play early on.
Yeah, and Shane, you know how I kind of feel about linebackers as well. I mean, it's similar to kind of how I feel about running backs on the offense side of the ball. Their careers just don't last that long. They take a lot of wear and tear. I'm pretty much always out on the off-ball linebackers in round 1, but I can absolutely get behind them as early as the 2nd round. And I think that's where we're looking at with a player like Jack Campbell. If he falls to that 32nd pick, that would be intriguing. If he falls to Pittsburgh original 2nd round pick, even better. It's worth noting that as far as I've seen, I don't believe that Campbell was a formal visit at the combine.
He was not, no.
Yeah, but Trenton Simpson was, Drew Sanders were, and so there is interest in potentially taking an early day 2 linebacker.
Yes, yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that Campbell won't be either. We still have to go through the offseason process. We'll see where the Steelers are when it comes to his pro day, see if he gets an in-house visit. But definitely an interesting guy there. I thought he had a great combine, improved his stock. Anybody else that you want to touch on, Shane, is in terms of stock risers, stock fallers?
As far as that goes, there's not a lot. There is one player I wanted to mention because it is someone that the Steelers met with, Emmanuel Forbes out of Mississippi State. His size
Yeah.
is definitely a red flag, and I think I do wonder if
Yeah.
something's going on there because he tested great, honestly, overall.
Yeah.
But it's just, again, I don't know if the weight that's just what his weight really is, or if he dropped weight for some reason. Maybe he wasn't feeling well, because we've seen that before where guys drop a ton of weight and then it turns out they're fine. They just got sick or something. But if he can't play in the 170s at least, or even close to 180, like his play style could get him out of the league pretty fast just from injuries, because he will hit you. And that's the thing that's interesting is his size. He doesn't look that small on tape. He really doesn't. So I hope that his weight was just an outlier thing, and because he'd be a player I'd be very interested in too, especially in the second round. So.
Yeah, I really like Forbes' tape, and the fact that he had 14 picks in 3 years at Mississippi State. He's got the long arms. He reaches the 6-foot threshold, but my goodness, he is skinny, and you could see that running through his drills and stuff. Like his legs are like twigs out there. I know, and so he's a guy that needs to bulk up a little bit. I think that in terms of his testing, I think he increased his stock, but teams are going to be concerned for sure about him coming to 166. He's got to play in the 180 range, I think, to be an outside corner, and that's where he should be because he's so good at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was another guy there. And I'll say real quick too. I think O'Cyrus Torrence hurt himself a little bit here just because the numbers were, I mean, in a pretty athletic group of offensive linemen, his numbers were pretty unspectacular. I view Torrence as like a really solid selection at like that 32nd spot. I can't get behind him. I don't think in my philosophy there, Shane, too, is I have a really hard time taking an interior offensive lineman in the middle of the first round, unless you are that David DeCastro level prospect. Then I can get behind it. So if it's like Skoronski, Skoronski is going to be guard in the NFL, I think. I mean, a team might. I think a team is going to try him at tackle, but with 32.25-inch arm, that's small. That's really, it's an outlier. Small.
Yeah, you're an outlier at that.
It certainly is, and I think he's a great football player. But I feel like if his floor is a very good guard, I can get way more behind that, especially testing as a 90th percentile athlete. When compared to guards, Skoronski tests as a 97th percentile athlete. Yeah. And I understand that for offensive linemen, there are things that matter a lot more than your testing does. But I think that Torrence I was already teetering on the idea of being like a late first round pick. I would take him in the second now. I think
ideally, yeah. It's just, again, like he's been a player that his power and his ability to run block is his thing. So that's why, like, I'm still taking him pretty early, just because I think he's going to be great at that no matter what.
Yeah.
But I do think, when you're looking at athleticism at guard, like the ability to move, get out and pull, get up to the second level and stay with guys and try to shadow them and get that block for the guy behind. Like that does matter somewhat, especially depending on your scheme. Yeah. So I think for us, like, it wouldn't matter as much for him. I think they'd just use him as a road grader, but it is something to consider because he's still a player, though, that you don't really worry about guards a lot of the time busting as often as other positions, especially, first round, second round. They're usually pretty quality players. So definitely wouldn't mind taking him still with that like 32 pick if that's where the board falls.
Yeah, and Torrence is a guy, he really doesn't fit the mold of what the Steelers have been doing in recent years with the nimble-footed guys that can reach, block, and do that kind of stuff. He's more of the power blocking guy. And so it'd be interesting to see how much interest is there. I think if the price is right, you can definitely get behind that. Yeah. Let's look at some of the top positions the Steelers have reportedly targeted at the combine in terms of their visits. And I'm liking what I'm seeing, Shane, because I think a couple of the strengths of this class is the cornerback position. First of all, I think it's extremely deep, especially at the top end of the draft. And so I can get behind that for sure. The Steelers had, as far as we know, 11 visits that I've been able to see at the combine with cornerbacks, including almost all the top cornerbacks this year. And then the offensive line, they visited 21, I believe, offensive linemen at the NFL combine. That's a lot of guys. And so there's clearly interest in improving the trenches there. And of those, Shane, that included my personal two favorite prospects for the Steelers this year. Don't know if either's going to be there. Broderick Jones and Paris Campbell. In my opinion, the two best offensive tackles in this class, because I view them as true left tackles in the NFL. And I'm not sure I can say the same for Skoronski as much as I like his tape. And so I would be thrilled to get a guy like Broderick Jones or Paris Johnson. And what they did at the combine was phenomenal too, in the movement drills, Broderick in the testing. Paris Johnson didn't do much testing, but my goodness, his arms come in at 36 and an eighth inches long. It's still one of the longest on record. And the way he's able to move, either one of those two guys, I would be ecstatic over. I just don't know how much interest the Steelers have in drafting an offensive tackle. They haven't done it in so long. It seems like they're long overdue. I just don't know how much his interest is truly there instead of saying, oh, I need a cornerback or I need to fill a specific hole. They might look at it and say, I've got Dan Moore. He's on a rookie contract. I got guys that are locked up. We're okay with them. I just don't think you should settle. And I've said that before.
I think the problem is that, again, like you said, the precedent isn't there with them taking an offensive tackle high. It just hasn't happened in forever, literally. It's been more than 2 decades since this happened. Like, it just, for me, like, it's nice to see how many offensive linemen they met with. It's nice to see that some of the top tackles that could be there they met with them. That's a good sign that they're at least looking at that as a possibility of pick 17. And I think what's going to come down to is you look at where they focus their time, a lot of trenches, corner, edge obviously is part of that too, defensive line. They're focusing on the right positions, I think, for them, which is a good sign, like I said, that they're maybe going to do what we hope that they do. But I think corner versus tackle is kind of the conversation that's probably happening right now. Is like, do they value if Porter Jr. is there? Can they help themselves from taking him at 17? And I don't mind if they do, but can they help that if one of Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones is there? Because I think it's very possible that at least one of them will be there. Probably only one, but I think it's definitely possible. The question then becomes, do you value that tackle more than the corner? I would value tackle more, but I understand if they take the corner. But then what can you do at 32? Can you get a tackle like maybe a DeJuan Jones, who, he tested pretty well for his size, at least. I think he's a good athlete enough to where you're not worried about him only being able to get in guys' way. We know his size profile is insane. Like, you don't really have to talk about that. He's a prototypical right tackle, though, I think, ideally. So, is that what you want to do? But I think if they come away with a corner and a tackle with their first 2 picks in some order or fashion, it's likely I'm going to feel good about it. It just depends on who those players end up being, obviously.
Yeah, I can see myself, as good as the corners are this year, Shane, I can see myself definitely getting disappointed if Broderick or Paris were to be on the board with the 17th pick. I'm like, you have a left tackle of the future sitting right here, and you take
especially with the depth at corner this year. Like, that's the thing that gets me. Like, I'd still rather them take a tackle if it's one of those 2 guys, especially. But I would at least understand. But
for sure, because it is a good cornerback class. But the tackle helps Kenny Pickett too. And the corner does not, other than maybe helping the defense get off the field a little bit sooner. But I mean, the tackle, it might buy an extra second for Kenny Pickett to throw a ball often. So, because I feel like, I don't know, there's a narrative out there, I think, Shane, that Steelers tackles they're at least baseline. They're at least good enough. I don't want to settle. I really don't. I think that is one area the Steelers can get much, much better. We looked at that. When you look at a Jordan Mailata and Orlando Browns, and those guys they're tiers better than what Dan Moore is. And I think that it's just a position that needs to be addressed because it hasn't in 26 years since taking Jermaine Stevens back in 1996. And so you have to, you got to break that mold and say, yeah, this isn't 90s football anymore. We can't just get away with drafting a 2nd or 3rd round tackle every so often and just get a guy that's going to run block or whatever. We need a true premier left tackle. And I think once you find that guy, things are going to start going better for them on offense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Shane, I want to do one more thing before we sign off for today. And I know it's so early and we're not even in free agency yet. So we don't know how the Steelers are going to spend their money. We don't know how they're going to prioritize things when it comes to this March in free agency. But I want to go ahead and I want to make our predictions for pick 17 right now. We don't have to go any further beyond that right now, but let's make our predictions on what the Steelers are going to do with that 17th pick. Now with the NFL Combine in the books, we kind of have a pretty good idea of, or at least a better idea of how things are going to lay out in the NFL draft. Guys that could certainly be gone at this point, or guys that maybe fallen a little bit. We'll start with you, Shane, if you're ready to go. And who would you have the Steelers picking if you got a chance to win $1 million right now? If you get the selection right, who is the 17th pick for the Steelers? Not what you would do. Who do you think they're taking with that pick?
I think if you're betting and you're trying to, like you said, if the goal is to get it right and to win, which would be great, $1 million, you have to go Joey Porter Jr. Again, all the same reasons that has been talked about. He's probably the third corner at best for most teams at this point, just because the other two guys ahead of him are just really, really good players as well. It's very possible that he makes it to 17, obviously, and the connection is there, right? They need the position. It's possible the tackles will be gone. Like, that is probably the most likely player that will be on the board that the Steelers have shown interest in and would make sense for them to draft. So if I get to throw in like two flyer options, I think the next two likely is offensive tackle and defensive interior. That's probably the three positions I'm looking at right now.
Okay. I'm really, really close to you, Shane. And I want to be able to say the same thing. I just feel like after this past weekend, and I was already kind of feeling that way a little bit, I think that's just even more so now. I don't think that Porter's going to be there. If I had to take a coin flip guess, I don't think he's going to be there just because I think when you look at the teams just ahead of Steelers in Washington and New England, who both need cornerbacks and both would value that type of player on their football field, I'm going to go with Deonte Banks, Maryland cornerback. I think that one just makes so much sense. Tomlin has a connection with Maryland. He's an athletic guy, underclassman. He checks all of the boxes Steelers look for, much like Porter does. But I'm assuming that Porter is going to be one of the three cornerbacks probably that's gone before that point.
Yeah.
And Banks will be the next best available, and they'll kind of lock in on that position. And not that there's a huge gap between Porter and Banks. I think they're both very well, highly graded players. But I'm going to go with Banks as my pick.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate it. Again, I think he's right there. So.
Okay. Shane, do you want to tell everybody who would be your favorite in a perfect world situation after post combine now? What would be your favorite selection realistically within some reason? Who would be your favorite selection 17?
At this point, if I'm going for both realism and like what I would think was best, I think Broderick Jones, because I think Johnson goes ahead of him, and I think it's very possible Skronsky still goes ahead of him, regardless of whether he's viewed as a guard or tackle. I think those two are very likely gone by 17. I think Jones could also be, but I think it's more likely that he'd be the one available at 17. And if not, again, I think there'd be no other tackle that I think would still be on the board worth pick of 17. So I still like the idea of Brzee at 17. I think he's a really high upside interior player. We need that to replace. So one of those two would be who I'd probably be hoping for at that point.
I'm going to align with you, Shane. I'm saying Broderick Jones. I've liked him throughout this process. I just think he has so much potential, and it hasn't even been tapped into yet as that future left tackle for potentially the next decade in Pittsburgh. So I'm saying Broderick Jones for the guy that I would make as my pick. I'm saying Deonte Banks as the guy that I believe the Steelers would pick if I had to guess right now. And that's all for us today. Thank you for joining us on the Still Curtain podcast. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube. And thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.